Welcome to Cheating Web Stories. We've got a thrilling story for you today, and we hope you love it, so sit tight and let's get into the story. Eva Ter had an evening that exceeded all her expectations. She and her sister-in-law enjoyed a luxurious dinner in South Beach, Miami. While the meal was exquisite, what Eva truly valued was the company. Braxton admired Eva, even though she was a middle-aged woman. Eva was the head of a family-run perfume business where Braxton had started this year as an entry-level accountant. Eva often picked out newcomers when she was seeking a new partner, especially when she grew tired of her husband. Although her marriage was relatively new, Eva had grown bored of her husband, Martin. Martin, who had been the CFO of the family business for the past 2 years, had brought stability but also boredom into her life. Their intimacy was just enough to keep their relationship alive, but Eva found Martin dull and ordinary. Martin, a fit man in his late 30s, maintained his physique through daily swimming, but to Eva, there was nothing particularly special about him. He never criticized her appearance, and privately, he was proud to have her as his wife. However, Martin lacked the charisma needed for public appearances and for promoting the brand. He worked best behind the scenes, which is likely why Eva married him. She needed someone to manage the finances and be a solid partner. It wasn't that Eva didn't love Martin, but she needed a younger man to satisfy her physical desires. At 45, Eva was still a prominent figure in both her professional and personal life, often serving as the face of sachet fragrances in TV commercials and magazines. Her graying hair, perfect makeup, and stylish clothes only added to her appeal. Braxton was Eva's latest attempt at finding a new lover. This was their first date, and it was Eva's first affair since her marriage. Her private security team had thoroughly vetted Braxton, and they found nothing significant except for a failed college relationship. He seemed clean and reliable, something Eva found refreshing. When she read the report, Eva was intrigued by him and planned to investigate him further. Despite being an accountant, Braxton was charming and respectable. His good looks and fashionable style caught her eye when she visited the accounting office one afternoon. Braxton was lively and stylish, a sharp contrast to Martin, who still wore outdated suits from the 80s. Martin had married Eva because he loved her and admired her beauty and intelligence. Before proposing, they had dated for almost a year, and Eva had immediately said yes. Martin hadn't planned on working for Sachet Fragrances, but once they were engaged, he decided to get involved in the business. He proved invaluable by easily converting the company's long-term debt into private equity. Proudly, Eva appointed him CFO and respected him for his dedication. Before the engagement, Martin had known about Eva's past affairs with younger men. They had discussed it in detail, and Eva had assured him that those relationships were over. Despite his doubts, Martin dismissed her past because they weren't married at the time. He trusted Eva, even though he emphasized that fidelity was crucial to the survival of their relationship, especially now that they were 39 and 43, respectively. In their first year of marriage, they enjoyed frequent, intense weekends together, and it seemed as if they were both satisfied. However, Martin had an uneasy suspicion that Eva might be dating someone else, but he never voiced his concerns or confronted her. These feelings stemmed from her past behavior, though there was no evidence to support his doubts. As their second year began, Eva's relationship with Braxton started to grow deeper, and she found herself increasingly drawn to him. Eva's passion had diminished, and Martin's suspicions reignited, but even as the CEO, he still couldn't prove anything. They had access to everything personal and private. Their 5,000-square-foot home always seemed excessive to Martin. He preferred saving money on the house, and investing in a condominium would have been enough for him, as they didn't need such a large home. The two of them lived in their grand house with a chef, maid, and butler. Martin enjoyed the indoor-outdoor pool daily, which opened through glass doors to their expansive Miami estate. The indoor pool was modern and pristine, while the outdoor plunge pool was heated, complete with a hot tub powered by solar panels. Martin found it extravagant, but he enjoyed maintaining it himself, making sure the water had the correct pH level to prevent it from turning green. The new fragrance launch in June had garnered a lot of media attention. The company had introduced a new scent just before the holiday shopping season, and it was promoted by celebrities throughout the summer. When the commercials featuring Eva aired at the end of September, the fragrance became an instant hit. This success only deepened the distance in their marriage. Eva was constantly traveling, rarely returning home. While Martin rationalized this as part of her work, his doubts about her commitment to the marriage began to grow. Martin had a sense that something wasn't right, because Eva's beauty naturally attracted attention from other men. As the person responsible for overseeing the company's finances, Martin knew that something big was brewing in their personal lives. When Eva returned from her 30-day roadshow after Thanksgiving, she was so exhausted that she slept for nearly 36 hours. Martin lovingly took care of her, tending to all her needs. The situation felt almost surreal to him. Despite being married for more than 2 years, his wife remained a mystery to him. Beautiful but needy during her depressive episodes, always seeking attention. Yet, at home, she seemed to enjoy the care and attention Martin gave her, as he was always there to look after her. As the holiday season approached, with her hectic travel schedule winding down, the chances of infidelity seemed to decrease. Martin was eager to spend Christmas with her, hoping to rekindle their relationship. Although Eva was promoting the new fragrance across America and Europe, and they remained in contact, Martin still doubted her loyalty. During Eva's travels, Martin had cameras installed throughout the house, keeping their locations hidden even from himself. One evening, he realized that the cameras had the ability to capture any activity within the house. The video and audio quality was top-notch, providing excellent surveillance. Martin suspected that Eva might have been involved with someone during her trips, but he couldn't rule out the possibility that something was happening at home as well. Monitoring the house was his first step in uncovering any infidelity. Their schedules rarely aligned, allowing Eva opportunities to meet someone in the house unnoticed. Each room in the house was equipped with a 3-camera system, backed up by batteries. The video streams were sent to a central cloud server via the internet, and each camera stored 24 hours of footage on memory cards. These cameras were wirelessly synced to the main cloud, making it impossible for any activities in the house to go unnoticed. Martin's computer could only be accessed via a password, and specialized software allowed him to view images from each room on a split screen or zoom in on specific footage. Martin's careful planning ensured he could keep an eye on Eva, the CEO, and catch her in an affair if it happened. He believed such a video would be tabloid gold. Martin hoped that the mere threat of exposure after the holidays would be enough to stop Eva. When Eva missed several dinner plans, Martin grew uneasy, but having the cameras in place gave him some relief. They enjoyed an incredible Christmas, filled with gifts and a honeymoon-like love life, before returning to work. Martin noticed a change in Eva, but the camera footage showed only love and affection as he reviewed it daily. At the end of January, Eva asked Martin to visit their factory in China for documentation and quality control checks, which raised Martin's suspicions. Still, he agreed, knowing this trip would give Eva a 2-week window that could potentially lead to an affair. After he left for China at the end of January, Martin thought to himself, "I have the cameras." However, Eva had her own plans. She intended to invite Braxton to dinner, not at some fancy South Beach restaurant, but right at her home. Eva felt there was no need to seduce Braxton, as he had already shown clear interest during their last dinner. She preferred having her lovers come to her, as it gave her a sense of control. Braxton, eager and excited, saw Martin as inferior and unable to satisfy Eva's needs. He fancied himself as the perfect lover and believed that with Eva's backing, he could use this affair to climb to the CFO position. That afternoon, Eva called Braxton into her office. He promptly waited in the reception area until her assistant let him in. Eva appreciated his promptness and decisiveness. "Braxton, thank you for your promptness. I'll get straight to the point. Would you like to join me for dinner at my house tonight? I want to review the sales figures for our new fragrance. Please arrive at 7 o'clock and bring the sales charts," Eva said, with her usual commanding tone. "It would be my pleasure, Mrs. Ter. Based on what I've seen, I'll bring the sales numbers. The promotion has been outstanding," Braxton replied eagerly. "Thank you, Braxton, and please call me Eva when we're alone because tonight we will be," she added, smiling slightly. "As we review the numbers over dinner, you can drop the formalities." As Braxton left, logically he was a bit surprised and slightly disappointed that there hadn't been any flirting this time, especially after their last dinner went so well. He guessed that Eva was being cautious in the office to avoid any suspicion, even though he knew what she wanted based on her gestures. The way she licked her lips and twirled a lock of her hair gave it away. Meanwhile, Eva's security team monitored her every move, both electronically and physically. Martin was unaware that Eva's house underwent monthly electronic equipment checks. While Martin knew about her physical security, he had no idea that her team had discovered his hidden cameras soon after they were installed. Eva decided not to expose the cameras. Instead, she asked if they could be temporarily disabled without Martin knowing. Her chief of security advised against disabling the cameras, fearing it could be risky. Instead, they suggested using a device to jam the wireless transmission, causing a blank screen. Eva found this idea amusing and immediately ordered the jammer to be installed, confident that Martin would have no evidence of what happened next. Although she had some suspicion that she would be back home by 4:30, Eva relaxed in the master bedroom and enjoyed a glass of Chardonnay in a warm, bubbly bath until 5:30. When she got out, she slipped into her cozy robe. She felt completely at ease and had already instructed the chef on preparing dinner. She just needed to make sure her wine was served correctly and that everything else was in order. "Martha, is dinner ready?" Eva asked as she looked over the dining room, set for two with candles, just as she had requested. The menu included lobster bisque, a crisp blue cheese salad, and sea bass with baked chili and almond beans. One of Eva's favorites, perfectly paired with the wine. Martha assured her that everything in the kitchen was prepped, and all Eva needed to do was turn on the oven and burners at the right time. Eva was confident Braxton would help set the table while they mischievously sipped wine. She was excited about the evening and thrilled by the sense of control she had. At 6:15, she went to the bedroom to get ready. Using a remote control, she deactivated the camera Martin had set up, so now the screen only showed static. She knew a new scene was about to unfold. Standing in front of the closet, she wondered what to wear tonight. A business suit felt too formal, and a short skirt too provocative. She chose a red dress she had bought in Paris, which felt just right for the occasion. Pairing it with heels and pearls, she went for an elegant, old-fashioned look. Along with this, she wore a red and black lace garter and bra that flattered her figure. As she pulled on black nylon stockings over her smooth legs, she imagined how Martin would react if he saw her like this. As the thought crossed her mind, she quickly dismissed it, deciding that only a younger man could truly fulfill her desires. She was certain Braxton would be ready to please her in the bedroom. She felt no guilt, only satisfaction with the situation. As she finished getting ready, the doorbell rang at 7 p.m. Braxton arrived confidently, his arrogance and charm making her even more attracted to him. The chef and butler had left as instructed. Braxton showed up in a light blue shirt, dark blazer, and navy pants, which made his presence even more striking. His dark hair and deep gray eyes captivated Eva. When she opened the door, she reminded herself to focus on dinner first and then discuss sales figures. Meanwhile, Braxton brought wine and flowers, a thoughtful gesture that Eva hadn't experienced in any previous affair. Eva offered him a drink, but he declined in favor of sparkling water, while Eva poured herself another glass of Chardonnay. Before heating the soup, she double-checked Martha's instructions to ensure everything was perfect. Meanwhile, Martin had landed in Tokyo and was waiting for his next flight to Beijing when his phone alerted him. He saw that the house cameras weren't working and the screen was only showing static. He tried to fix the issue but had no luck. He then decided to contact the security company, while back home, Eva and Braxton were enjoying dinner. Braxton took a glass of wine but didn't drink much, while Eva was getting tipsy. She felt excited thinking about whether Braxton would be as good in bed as he was at dinner. She teasingly ran her foot along Braxton's ankle. At first, he was a little startled, but then smiled and began discussing the new sales numbers. "Hey, can't a wife miss her husband?" she said with a slight hint of annoyance. "Of course, I miss you too. Come home, Martha has dinner ready for us," he replied immediately. "But I just want to stay with you today," she added. Even though the camera had malfunctioned, Martin could still see the guilt in her eyes. Then suddenly she asked, "So, what's for dessert?" She playfully raised an eyebrow. Eva smiled mischievously. "I'll have dessert, but they'll eat it." They spent the entire weekend in bed, eating, making love, and taking showers together. On Monday, memories of their honeymoon came flooding back to Eva. They took a shower together that morning, like they were reliving their weekend. What Eva felt with Martin was something she had never experienced with Braxton Love. When Martin hugged her, it felt like she wanted time to stop right there. Martin's deep devotion and care made Eva feel special, which was the complete opposite of how she felt when she was with Braxton. She immediately dismissed thoughts of Braxton, deciding not to let anything tarnish the beautiful weekend she had spent with Martin. Martin drove to work in his sleek Ferrari, even though he usually preferred driving his Tesla. But after being away for 2 days, he opted for the Ferrari. Eva took a cab to work since she wanted to check the emails she had ignored while spending time with Martin. Her plan seemed to be working perfectly, as Martin had no suspicion that Braxton had come to their house the previous weekend. Martin was also relieved that Eva didn't leave with him that morning. He was surprised to see that the security cameras, which had malfunctioned the previous day, were suddenly working fine. Suspicious, he immediately called the security company he had hired. They had given the company access keys to their security system, so there was no issue with them inspecting the setup on Monday. No specific reports were expected until later in the morning, but when the experts sent in their findings, they mentioned discovering an additional device inside the house that they didn't recognize. That equipment was not part of the initial setup they had installed. The expert suggested that this new device could be jamming the camera's signals. Martin's heart sank. He was now certain that Eva had somehow bypassed the security and disabled the cameras. There was no doubt in his mind that Eva was cheating on him. He thought, "Now I have to confront her and ask why she never mentioned the cameras." She could have simply said that it was for her personal safety, but she had no idea that the cameras were there, and after lunch she deliberately disabled them. She had started taking initial steps to secure herself financially. Eva asked her personal assistant to call Braxton to meet her in her office at 10 a.m. Gina had been with her for the past 10 years, always loyal. She earned more than others in the company, a reward for her loyalty that Eva had bought and paid for over the years. However, Gina already knew what was happening when Braxton was called into Eva's office. Gina admired Eva deeply, sometimes even dreaming of becoming like her one day. But what Eva was doing to her husband was simply wrong. Gina had no idea that Eva had been fooling around with people like Braxton, just as she had done with others before her marriage. While Gina hoped that Martin was not entirely oblivious to what was going on, she wished she could warn him about Eva's extracurricular activities. Martin had always been kind to her, never speaking down to her. In fact, he treated her well, and she thought he was personable and genuinely cared about the people in the company. She understood why Eva was so attracted to him. Martin was fit, clean-shaven, and had striking blue eyes. Even though he was 35 years older than her, he still seemed youthful. At 9:55 a.m., Braxton sat next to Gina, ready to meet Eva. It was unusual. Gina thought it strange that Eva hadn't asked him to bring any documents to make the meeting more businesslike. Was it just for pleasure? Surely Eva wouldn't just be fooling around with him. Braxton entered Eva's office while Gina stayed by the door, listening. She could have turned on the intercom to hear better, but that would have been risky if Eva noticed the light. Eva called Gina on the intercom, and she immediately answered, signaling Braxton to come in. He opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. As the door closed, Gina pretended to continue her phone conversation while discreetly pressing the intercom button again. She knew she was taking a risk, but above all, she wanted to make sure something was going on between Braxton and Eva. "I'm afraid we're going to have to break this off," Eva said quietly. "Martin is back from China, and I don't want to take any more risks with you." Braxton shifted in his chair and replied, "And what if I don't want to? What if I want to keep having an affair with the company's CEO?" His voice was loud enough that anyone outside Eva's office could hear him. Eva calmly responded, "I hope you're just being playful, Braxton. Don't threaten me. If you do, things won't go well for you." Braxton shot back bitterly. "What if I tell your husband, my boss, about last weekend?" Eva's smile faded. She responded softly, "Wow, I didn't think you thought so little of me and us. I think you're underestimating me if you believe you'll get away with this," Eva said, her voice sharp and firm. "Do you think you can just walk into Martin's office and tell him whatever you want? It's your word against mine, Braxton, and I know exactly who Martin will believe." Her words were tough, but she felt a slight tremble in her voice, revealing her true emotions. Braxton smirked, starting to walk toward the door, but Eva wasn't done yet. Before he could leave, she added conspiratorially, "Before you go, consider that our entire affair has been documented, and with just a little Photoshop magic, it'll look like you forced yourself on me. I remember screaming at you to stop that first night. Imagine how that's going to look on your resume." Braxton, now furious, shouted from across the room, "You think you've won, but we're done, and so are you. I suggest you start looking for a new job if you don't want to get burned." Eva barely lifted her eyes from the papers on her desk, dismissing him with cold indifference. Gina, who had been quietly listening to everything through the intercom, hung up the phone, her mind racing. Braxton stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Gina immediately dialed Eva's number. "Eva, is everything all right? Should I call security?" "No, Gina, it's fine," Eva replied calmly. "Just a minor misunderstanding about the direction the company's heading in. Nothing to worry about, but thank you for your concern." Braxton, meanwhile, was furious at how the conversation had ended. As he left the building, it was clear that he had been outplayed. Gina asked, "Is there anything I can bring you, Eva? Perhaps some tea?" "Actually, that would be great, Gina." "Thanks, you're the best," Eva replied with a smile, returning to her work. Gina went to make the tea, her thoughts swirling. Everything she had suspected was true. Braxton was history now. But now Gina was faced with a dilemma. Should she remain loyal to Eva, or was it time to warn Martin about what his wife had been doing behind his back? She felt torn between her loyalty to her boss and doing the right thing. When she returned with the tea, Braxton was long gone, and Eva smiled as Gina placed the cup on her desk. "As I said, just a small misunderstanding. There's nothing to be concerned about," Eva reassured her again. "It seems that Mr. Perrin will be looking for work elsewhere." "Wow, I had no idea things like this were happening in finance," Gina responded, clearly impressed. "But why didn't Martin handle this himself?" Eva, now slightly irritated by the questions, paused. This was her company, and she didn't owe anyone any explanations. Still, she thought it might be better to calm Gina down rather than dismiss her. "Sometimes it's better to handle things quietly, Gina," Eva said coolly. especially when people aren't willing to listen. Gina replayed every event from that morning in her mind. She knew that this meeting could change everything. She had assessed the situation and now realized that she had to take action. But there was also a fear lingering inside her. Was what she was about to do the right thing? She glanced at Eva, who was calmly sipping her tea in her usual composed and dignified manner, as if nothing was wrong. Eva's face remained neutral, just as it always did, showing no trace of emotion. But Gina knew it was just a facade. "Martin told her what to do and she didn't do it. Is that what you're saying?" Eva asked, her voice devoid of any particular emotion. Gina only nodded. She knew there was no point in arguing here. Her role was simply to deliver the message, and she had done that. "All right, you may leave now," Eva said with a faint smile, as if she had already made all the decisions. Gina, as always, felt dismissed. She rose gracefully and walked out of Eva's office without saying a word. But inside, she was burning with anger. "How dare this woman treat someone like Martin this way?" she thought to herself. When she reached her desk, she immediately picked up her phone and sent Martin a quick message. "Hey, Martin, can you meet me for lunch at 12:30? I have something very important to discuss with you." Within minutes, Martin replied, "Of course. How about Tres Amigos on the 3rd floor?" Gina breathed a small sigh of relief. "Thanks, Martin. I apologize for the short notice, but we really need to talk." "No worries, Gina. I'll meet you at 12:30, Martin replied. There was still unease in Gina's mind, but she knew this conversation needed to happen. As the time approached, her heartbeat quickened. She knew this day and this conversation could change everything for her and Martin. At 12:30, Gina walked toward the restaurant. Martin was already seated at a table, as if he had known all along that Gina would arrive on time. He waved her over. She noticed that he looked calm, but there was a questioning look on his face. As soon as Gina pulled out her chair, the waitress appeared. They quickly ordered from the small lunch menu and decided to share the chicken fajitas. After the waitress left, Martin spoke in a serious tone. "So, Gina, what's on your mind that's got you so concerned?" Gina took a deep breath. She sipped her iced tea and looked at Martin. Her heart was racing, but she tried to remain composed. "Martin, I know this won't be easy for you to hear, but I think Eva is involved with Braxton Perrin." Martin's expression immediately changed. He looked surprised, but he didn't respond right away. His eyes filled with thought as if he was trying to process what she had just said. "How do you know that?" he asked in a calm voice. Gina hesitated for a moment before answering. "This morning, I overheard a conversation between the two of them. Eva told Braxton that she can't continue the relationship because you might find out." Martin didn't say anything. He took a long sip of his iced tea and stared blankly at the table as if lost in deep thought. Gina wondered if maybe he already knew something, but she couldn't understand why he wasn't reacting more to her words. A few moments later, the waitress returned and placed their plates in front of them. The sizzling sound of the chicken fajitas filled the air between them. Martin looked up at Gina and said softly, "Thank you, Gina. I appreciate you telling me." Gina was confused by how calmly Martin was accepting this. "Thank you? I just told you that your wife is having an affair, and you're thanking me? Why aren't you angry? Aren't you ready to confront Braxton? Or even Eva?" Gina's voice rose with each question. Martin took a deep breath and then asked in a serious tone, "Gina, how long have you worked at True Fragrance?" Gina was taken aback by the question. She hadn't expected him to ask that. She replied slowly, "I just hit my 10-year anniversary recently." "And in all those years, have you ever seen Eva with anyone like Braxton before?" Martin asked. Gina hesitated, still trying to understand where this was going. "Yes, I've seen a few younger men come and go," she replied. "So what makes Braxton different?" Martin asked, his gaze piercing. Gina couldn't answer that question. She had never thought about it from that angle. She was still trying to make sense of it all. How could Martin be so calm about this? Martin took another deep breath and spoke slowly. Look, Gina, I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem on the surface. So, are you saying you don't care? Gina asked in disbelief. Gina, it's not as simple as you think, Martin replied. There are things between Eva and me that you may not fully understand. And Braxton, he's just one part of a much larger picture. Gina had nothing left to say. She tried to process what Martin was trying to tell her, but one thing was clear. This conversation was taking a turn she hadn't expected at all. Martin took a deep breath, his voice carrying an unusual calmness that seemed out of place considering the situation. Gina, the thing is, I deliberately chose to tie myself to this marriage. I knew there were many uncertainties in Eva's life. I never thought she would truly commit to one person, but still, I made a promise to myself that I would try to change her. Maybe that was my mistake. Gina listened carefully to Martin's words, a flicker in her eyes as she tried to process what he was saying. But how could you do that? You took this step knowing all of this. Martin's tone was steady and cold. I knew Eva was someone who lived by her desires. She's a free spirit, and I accepted that. But now that she's crossed the line, I can't hold her back anymore. I know this relationship is eventually going to end. Gina thought about how hard this must be for Martin. Emotionally separating from Eva could be just as difficult as trying to keep her close. So what are you going to do now? I'm not going to do much. At least not until I fully understand the situation. I know Eva is still in contact with Braxton. I don't want to end this from just one side, Martin replied calmly. Gina felt a little disappointed by Martin's reaction. She had expected him to be a bit angrier, but his calm demeanor left her feeling more confused. So you're just going to let this happen? It's not about letting it happen, Gina. It's about planning. When the right time comes, I'll end it. I'm not a fool. I've kept my composure, but that doesn't mean I'm passively enduring all of this. Gina took a deep breath and listened closely to Martin's words. So, are you going to let her stay with Braxton? A cold gleam appeared in Martin's eyes. No, I'm not going to let her stay with Braxton. That's part of her decision, but I'm not going to interfere with it. Until she decides for herself that she wants to leave me, I'll remain calm. But I know she won't be able to drag this out for too long. Gina nodded slowly, starting to understand Martin's plan. So, what's your plan? I'm just going to wait. Let her realize her mistakes. When she breaks down on her own, that's when I'll make my move. And I know she will, Martin said quietly, his eyes holding an eerie calmness. Gina was impressed by how composed Martin seemed. She started thinking that maybe his plan was the right one. He was waiting, staying in his place, knowing that Eva would eventually face her mistakes. Finally, Gina said, "All right, Martin, I understand. But if you need any help from me, don't hesitate to ask. I'm always ready to help you." Martin gave her a small smile as he looked at her. "Thank you, Gina. I know you're on my side and I'll always appreciate your help. But right now, I need to handle this my way." Gina picked up her glass and took a sip. She knew this situation was only going to get more complicated. It was clear that this story was far from over. She thought to herself how complex this relationship was and how long this game could go on. Martin glanced at his watch and said, "I think I should head back to work now. We'll talk more about this later." Gina nodded in agreement and said, "All right, Martin. I won't bring this up again until you're ready to talk." "That's right," Martin said, standing up. "And Gina, thank you. What you're doing means a lot to me." Gina gave a slight smile, but there were still questions swirling in her mind. She knew this situation could get even more complicated, and this game might last longer than either of them expected. "Did the cameras not show what you thought was happening?" It feels like you already knew everything I told you today, Gina asked, her voice laced with a hint of doubt. Martin responded with a somber tone. Yeah, I would think the same. But somehow Eva must have figured out about the cameras. She probably set up some tech to shut them off whenever she wanted. So, what she said to Braxton about the cameras today wasn't just a threat. She knew about them and deliberately kept them from working. Gina shook her head in disbelief. She's so clever. I didn't see that coming. Don't beat yourself up over it. I had no clue either, Martin replied. Do you think she actually wrote anything down, or was she just bluffing? I mean, if the cameras didn't show anything, maybe she just pointed them somewhere else where nothing would be caught? Gina smiled slightly. You know, Martin, you're pretty sharp. Sometimes subtle details slip past, but maybe there's some truth to what she said. Martin nodded. Maybe. I don't fully understand all the tech behind it, but it's possible. I'll call the security company and ask them to take a closer look at the cameras. Concerned, Gina added, she was so mad. That might be why she figured out how to disable them. I never even considered that possibility. Thanks, Gina, Martin said, sounding genuinely appreciative. Listening to you, it feels like you've opened my eyes to things I didn't even realize. Gina said softly, I can't believe she went that far just to deceive you. I'm no saint, but I can't sit here and watch someone like Eva take advantage of a good person like you. You don't deserve this. Martin, deep in thought, replied, I know. But it's out of my hands now. Standing up, Gina looked at Martin and said, Thanks for trusting me. It took me a while to understand, but I swear I'll take this conversation to my grave. With that, she quickly left. Martin sat there for a moment, finishing off his iced tea before paying the bill. He wasn't in a rush to get back to the office. The weight of defeat hung over him, even though Eva claimed she was ending her little affair. But deep down, Martin had this nagging feeling that Eva would always find a way to get away with it. She might take a break for a while to make things seem normal so no one would suspect anything, but Martin was sure Eva would come back to him. Once things calmed down, she would find some way to avoid the cameras and hide her affair, and that thought bothered him the most. In the office, Martin checked his voicemail. Eva had informed him that Braxton Perrin was no longer working for True Fragrance, and HR would help him prepare his exit package. Martin knew he had to come up with a reason that wouldn't be too difficult, considering the circumstances. There should be a section on the form to explain the reason. I had an affair with the boss's wife, he thought to himself with a sarcastic grin. By 5 o'clock, Martin had called Braxton into his office. Braxton, he said calmly, it's come to my attention that you've been tampering with the company's expense reports. Unfortunately, we have a zero-tolerance policy for employee theft, and effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Please gather your personal belongings and leave the premises. Security will be outside in 10 minutes. Make sure you only take your personal items. Braxton muttered angrily, You just do whatever your wife tells you to, don't you, fool? Martin responded calmly. Excuse me? Braxton repeated. You heard me loud and clear. I seduced your wife, and now you're firing me because of it. Martin, still without showing any emotion, said, You're right. I'm doing exactly what my wife asked me to do. And yes, I'm firing you. Thank you for confirming that you had an affair with Eva. I hope it was worth it. Braxton, feeling more powerful now, said, You're pathetic, and the best part is how easily I seduced your wife. What does that say about you as a man? Martin remained perfectly calm. That may be true, Braxton. But what I know for sure is that you're fired. You won't get a good reference, and this will hurt your career. Having a fraud charge for tampering with expense reports on your record will never look good. Braxton sneered. So this is all about that fake fraud accusation, huh? Martin paused for a moment before replying. And you've admitted to having a physical relationship with a senior member of the board who happens to be my wife. I think that's enough." Braxton, now fuming, said, "Don't you care about your wife?" Idiot. "So you're telling me you're not even angry about the relationship between me and her?" In a cold, measured voice, Martin responded, "I think this is beyond your understanding." "You're really just a broken man," Braxton said, irritation growing in his voice. "No, I'm not angry at all," Martin replied calmly. "Honestly, it's kind of a relief. It never really felt like she was truly mine. If you need her, feel free to call any time. She's yours. In fact, she's had plenty of guys like you. To be honest, you're just another notch on her bedpost. I'm sure she's already forgotten about you and is looking for her next conquest." Braxton tried to keep his smug smile, but he started to feel defeated. He thought maybe he could provoke Martin into a fight. After all, being a former college wrestler, Braxton was confident he'd win. "Here's a piece of advice. Get yourself tested," Braxton spat, then held his anger in check as he turned to leave Martin's office. "Now get out," Martin said coldly, his eyes locked firmly on Braxton. Braxton ignored Martin's glare, gathered his belongings, and walked out of the office. As Braxton approached his car, he fumbled for his keys in his pocket. The moment he pressed the button, the car suddenly erupted into a massive fireball. The explosion was so intense that Braxton was lifted a few inches off the ground. If he had been any closer, it could have killed him. As the flames shot up, Braxton realized he had crossed someone he should never have provoked. He began rethinking his actions. By the end of the week, tension between Martin and Eva had only worsened. Eva couldn't shake the image of Braxton's car explosion, but she tried to push it to the back of her mind. On Saturday, she had tried to contact Martin, but he remained distant. He stayed cold and distant all Sunday as well, making Eva even more suspicious. She decided not to confront him, hoping Martin would work through it on his own. She was sure Braxton had told Martin about their affair. Meanwhile, Braxton wasn't afraid of Martin. He was confident that Eva would want him back soon, and he spent the entire weekend thinking about her. He couldn't understand why Eva was still on his mind more than any other woman. The allure of the unattainable kept him obsessed, and despite her being married, he believed Eva still desired him and wanted to be with him. He didn't care much about his 2-year-old Honda being destroyed. In fact, he saw it as a new opportunity, a fresh start. In the meantime, the police didn't find anything unusual in their investigation, except for some burned wires near the fuel pump, which they believed to be the source of the explosion. Braxton wasn't too bothered. He knew he'd need to buy a new car and hoped the insurance company would settle the claim quickly. On the other hand, Martin was already planning his next move. Martin's goal now wasn't just to distance himself from Eva, but to make sure both she and Braxton paid in a way they would never forget. He had formed a solid plan in his mind, and all he needed was the perfect moment to strike. After making Gina the new face of Sac Fragrance, Martin slowly began to realize that no matter how hard he tried, Eva would never be loyal to her work or their relationship. Over the past few weeks, he exhausted himself emotionally and mentally, trying every time to convince himself that there might be a way to fix things. But despite all his efforts, he couldn't reignite his feelings for Eva. The distance between them kept growing. Eva, on her part, tried to hold on to Martin, but he was now fully absorbed in his own world, a world where Eva no longer had a place. Despite her frustration with Martin's changed behavior, Eva remained calm. She hoped that it was just a passing phase and that soon things would return to normal. But as the weeks passed, she realized something had changed in Martin. He only spoke to her out of formality, and there was no depth or emotion in his words like before. 6 long weeks had passed, and Eva couldn't wait any longer. Her desires were overwhelming her, and she decided to call Braxton. Braxton, the man who had come between Martin and Eva's relationship, answered the phone as soon as he heard Eva's voice. "Meet me at my house at 6, Eva said in a calm voice. "Don't be late. I need to see you." Braxton hung up with a smile. He knew exactly what this call was about. He looked at himself in the mirror, fixed his hair, and then headed to the bathroom to shower. As evening came, Braxton finished getting ready and headed to Eva's house. It was already dark by the time he arrived, and he assumed that Martin wouldn't be home. The moment he rang the doorbell, Eva opened the door and let him in. "Turn off the cameras," she ordered immediately. "Martin's at a conference in Jacksonville, and he won't be back until tomorrow. Once I'm satisfied, you'll leave." Braxton, without hesitation, turned off the cameras. As soon as he stepped inside, Eva told him to go to the bedroom. "Go to the bedroom and take your clothes off. No explanations, no games," Eva said, her words sharp and clear. Braxton didn't ask any questions. He took off his clothes and lay down on the bed. A few minutes later, Eva entered the room with 2 glasses of white wine. She handed one to Braxton and lay down beside him. Adjusting the pillow, she said, "You're not staying the night. Satisfy me, and when I say it's time, you'll leave." Braxton nodded, took a sip of his wine, and followed her orders. He knew tonight was an opportunity, but he also understood that this time, Eva was here solely to fulfill her own desires. He quickly finished his wine and got to work. Eva felt as though a heavy burden was being lifted from her. Her affair with Braxton was illegal, but it gave her the thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. As good of a husband as Martin had been, the excitement she felt with Braxton in this moment was unmatched. After some time, when Eva had had enough, she told Braxton, "That's enough. Take your clothes and get out." Braxton didn't like being used, and anger flashed in his eyes. "You can't just order me around. I've done so much for you. And now you're telling me to leave like this?" Eva ignored his frustration and said, "I said get out. I'll lock the door when you leave." Braxton was furious, but he held himself back. He bent down to pick up his clothes. As he stepped next to the bed, he felt something on the floor. He lifted his toes and noticed a metallic object underneath. Not giving it much thought, he stood back up. But the moment he did, a loud snap shook both him and Eva. A sharp pain shot through his leg. Braxton tried to move his foot, but he couldn't. He collapsed to the floor, screaming. Eva jumped up and turned on the nightlight. "Oh my God, Braxton! What happened?" She saw that Braxton's right leg was caught in a bear trap that had been placed near the bed. The trap was chained to the bed frame. "What did you do to me?" Braxton groaned in pain. Eva, stunned, replied, "I didn't do anything. I think my husband set that trap." Braxton writhed in agony. "Eva, take me to the hospital. If you don't get me out of this, I'm going to die. Please give me my phone so I can call for help." Eva heard him, but was frozen in her confusion. She thought about calling for help, but knew that if she did, it would trigger an investigation. She felt as though she were trapped in a similar way to Braxton, caught in a situation with no easy way out. For a moment, she even considered grabbing a weapon to put Braxton out of his misery and then turning the weapon on herself. The whole situation seemed so unreal to her that she slowly sank into a nearby chair. Eva had always considered herself a decent person, but could she really let someone die in front of her eyes? Martin's words from when he proposed to her echoed in her mind. Trust is the most important thing. Without it, there's no relationship. She knew now that Martin would never trust her again. No matter what happened, their relationship would never be the same. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to muster the courage to do something. Meanwhile, Braxton struggled to free himself from the trap. He used all his strength but could only pry it open by 1/4 of an inch. Every time the trap snapped shut again, the pain grew worse. He was losing strength fast and was exhausted. Eva, take me to the hospital. I'm going to die if you don't get me out of this. He pleaded one last time. Eva looked at him but said nothing. She was still wondering whether she would save him or leave him to his fate.